Shalom, and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamed in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemen, and joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, on Sheikh Chesed, New York City, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Sheikh, the Day School of Long Island. We are recording this for the week of Shabbat Nachamu, but we are Menachem. We have no comfort here on day 669 as we mark day 669 of the captivity of the hostages, this war, and its lingering calamities, and praying that the hostages will come home, that all human suffering will be alleviated. We are deeply mindful of that as we begin a Shabbat of Nachamu, thinking about this idea of comfort and comfort after devastation. Thinking about how we talked about this last year, in we were just 7 months removed, 8 months removed from it. Now we're 20 something months removed. And while the experiences of the 7th of October have kind of folded in to Jewish understanding, there's still lots of comfort. I I find even when with the bereaved, there's no shortage. There's no limits to how much comfort one can give. Understanding that the comfort itself moves through different phases, and perhaps we'll talk about that. But first, we should talk about Parshat Vaethanan, and Vaethanan is very special parsha because it contains a lot of texts that are familiar to our shul going and Torah reading communities, including Shema Yisrael, Hero Israel, V'ahavta, including the Ten Commandments, including many, many verses that are sprinkled throughout Jewish liturgy that somehow the rabbis felt and the editors of the Siddur felt, we'll take V'atem Advekim, we'll take that verse, we'll place it over here, we'll take Vizot Torah, we'll take that verse, we'll take Ata Hareta Ladat, we'll take that verse, and I haven't done as a good statistical study of saying how many verses from Parshat Vaetchanan appear elsewhere in the liturgy, and that would be a good trivia question for many of our friends at Machane Raman, the Berkshires, to explore as they study this parsha with us. But I want to go to a pasuk that maybe doesn't get as much attention, but raises some questions. At least it raised questions for me, and I think it will raise questions for people to be more attentive to. And that is chapter 4, verse 20. Moshe is talking about, the lead up to Mount Sinai and reviewing all the things. And of course, he's saying, don't make images and don't make images of this and of that. And then we get this verse that says as follows, chapter 4, verse 20. Vatchem lakach Adonai, and you, God took, vayotzi etchem, he took you out, mikura barzel, from the iron crucible, the iron furnace, or the crucible of iron, or whatever that is, a kur, lovely word, very rare word, mimitzrayim, from Egypt, liot lo la'am nachala kayom hazeh, to be his inheritance, his possession as of this day. And reading this parsha, thinking of what to talk about, both for the sermon, both for a parsha sheet, and discussion, isn't that an interesting metaphor? Um, the Kur HaBarzel, the iron furnace, and comparing Egypt. I'll repeat it again. It's like it says, "I took you out, Mikur Habar. I took you out of the iron furnace from Egypt." Stop there. So if I mention that metaphor to you, I'm going to start with you, Barry. What does that suggest to you? What does the iron furnace suggest to you as a metaphor for Egypt?
Well, as we were talking before we started recording, the iron furnace suggests a great act of creation. Now we think of a blacksmith where he fashions tools, things that enable people to do things that they cannot do just with their bare hands. Great things. And it requires a tremendous amount of heat and it's dangerous. And it suggests that there's a process that was at work at Egypt, that Egypt was not simply a negative experience, although it's hard to, one cannot get away from the negativity of it, but that it was a fashioning experience, that there was an element of creativity, that in fact it required this long-term servitude for Israel to become Israel. And it doesn't really sit well with me to think of Egypt like that.
It's such I mean, it's an interesting, like all poetry, poetry has to have a certain kind of shock on you. It has to kind of stop you. I think that was Emily Dickinson. Is I understand a poem when it kind of blows my head off, or she probably didn't say blows my head off. She probably said I'm moved in some way. And what's startling here is that you know, I'll use myself as an experience here, which is I don't have any direct experience with metallurgy. Although I'm told that my great grandfather after whom I'm named was a blacksmith or worked with metal. Maybe that's why I'm attracted to this image. Maybe it's something I'm trying to summon from deep in my heritage that he worked with fire and he worked with iron. Uh, but it's striking, literally, uh, to say one thing is like another. Jeremy, I don't know. When I ask you to reflect on a metaphor, so you can reflect on the metaphor as a metaphor, but reflect on also the creation of metaphors as a way of shaping experience. There's a kind of ars poetica here. There's let's talk about poetry for a second. Let's talk about what, you know, he may be very good at this and just be able to summon this out of the thin air, but you don't summon metaphors out of thin air. They come from somewhere. So what does this metaphor mean? And why is he using a metaphor? And what does this metaphor do to shape our understanding?
So I'm interested just to, Barry said, that it doesn't really sit that well. The mental matrix of this metaphor is that the terrible things that happen, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And there's redemptive suffering that intensifies who you are. And if this is, by the way, what Kur HaBarzel means, um, there's you come out of this experience uh, better and purer. Like Rashi actually says on this Kur HaBarzel line, Rashi says that it's a kur is the vessel in which they purify gold.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so does he mean? I mean, what's the barzel then? What's the iron? Does he mean that we have an iron instrument which purifies gold? I think that's probably the shot of the simple meaning of what Rashi means. Or does he mean that this is the uh, instrument which purifies iron and produces something really, really strong? I think Rashi must. Why would you bring in gold if what it seems to me that what he means is that I got this piece of iron and I use it in such a way that I get better gold out. And so the Kur HaBarzel is not the thing that produces iron in that reading. It would be the iron method by which we produce gold. And that is a claim that, like you got better, you got refined in this suffering. And that's the reason that, perhaps
Well,
Barry,
it's not just that you got refined, it's what made you a people.
it's
That
what,
we
yeah.
we would not have Israel without this. And that I find jarring, although
Oh,
perhaps
yeah.
that is what explains the what seems to me a fundamental moral problem in the Torah in Bereshit Tetvav, Genesis 15, where God tells Moses that you'll die in bed, old and happy, but your descendants will be slaves for 400 years.
Abraham, yeah, that's his Abraham. And the just to compare this, like you okay, big asterisk. I'm not claiming this, but you would never say to an African American, slavery, it really toughened you up.
Someone said that recently and was excoriated for it.
It would be an outrage. It was an outrageous thing to say. And we would not say, the Holocaust was really terrible, but it brought us together as a people. Although people do say, in some, I hope, highly attenuated, not one for one kind of way, that there is a connection. I mean, obviously, there's a connection between the ingathering of the exiles, the creation of the modern state of Israel, and the aftermath of the Shoah. Those things are true. So we would be very, very averse to saying that somehow Auschwitz is the Kur HaBarzel that refined us as a people. God forbid, 50 million times. But we do say all the time that there is some kind of, like, how is the journey through the Midbar is clearly portrayed as a passage from childhood to adulthood. You didn't really know how to feed yourself. God gave you manna. Then you come to the land of Israel, and the manna stopped, and they ate me'avor haaretz. They ate from the new grain, and that does sort of indicate that this really hard experience left you stronger and more developed on the other end. Um, so this one is a kind of interesting metaphor. I suspect that nobody would make that Holocaust metaphor because it's still so fresh. But in 300 years, they might say, that the Holocaust had some refining effect on the people. I make a metaphor out of it. I don't know. But the
Well,
metaphor, the principle of why metaphors are interesting is that there's a kind of elliptical quality to really important religious language, right? And not just religious, it could be literary and poetry general. But we are sort of saying something like, 2 + 2 is 4. That is an analytical fact that requires no other resonance. Abraham Lincoln was the president during the American Civil War. That's a historical fact. Um, Abraham Lincoln was a wise and insightful president. He was our greatest leader. Now you're talking about something that is not a fact. It's a whole way of looking at things. And when we start talking about religious ideas, which by definition are not 2 + 2 is 4, and they're not Abraham Lincoln was the president in 1861, they're pointing at truths that we don't easily understand. And so therefore, that elliptical language of saying this is like that, or there is some aspect of this experience that is captured not by stone cold hard facts, but captured instead by a resonance of something, just a musical note, a feeling, and those things are best conveyed with a figure as opposed to just, a fact.
it's so interesting. I mean, it speaks to the power of the metaphor. I just want to go back for a second to I think we understand why Rashi would say that. Rashi would say that that it's the instrument or the implementation for the manufacture of gold, and we get that we and he's probably basing himself on a midrash, and we'd have to do a little excavation to see what his sources were there. But it makes a lot of sense if you're Rashi to project into the experience a kind of refinement. But going back to a more simple approach here, how do you make iron? I mean, again, we're not involved in this, but I want to speak to our friends at Machane Ramah in the Berkshires because that's, the iron ore industry in the mid 19th century was very, very important in that region of Dutchess County, where you can still see the remnants of the iron ore industry and some of the names of streets, the iron furnace kiln drive. And if you drive up Route 22 to Wassaic, you'll see coke kilns. These are kilns that were used to manufacture coke, COKE, that was used which is the burning of wood into a very, very powerful carbon fuel that raises the temperature for smelting ore. And ore is basically earth, clumps of earth that you take literally from the ground, either the surface or shallow pits, and you put it in the furnace in some kind of thing, which is the core here, and you burn that thing way up to some 1200 degrees Fahrenheit, and then it turns into a liquid, and that becomes what's called the bloom. And the bloom or pig iron is then smashed by a smith with a hammer on an anvil and makes the ingots that you then smelt into tools, weapons,
No, what,
blades,
what
things.
what's smelt in this sentence? You burn it. First of all, I didn't get the part about you have to do it in wood because of the carbon quality.
The
The
ordinary
temperature.
wood that you burn only goes to a certain temperature. But if you take charcoal, why is charcoal work in your barbecue? Because it gets to a high temperature fairly quickly. Okay. And,
Yeah, it's very. I
and you
have actually a funny story about charcoal.
do.
So when we moved into our house, the owners before us had a Gen Air, and so I needed to kosher the grill part of the inside oven, and I didn't have a blowtorch, so I figured, I'll just put it on the grill.
Yeah.
Only charcoal gets to about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit,
Yeah.
which is higher than the melting point of aluminum, which is what
There,
the grill was made of.
there you
So it
go.
melted.
Yeah. So
So
so it's kosher in the end. It became a new substance.
Yeah.
wait, so you burn the ore in the charcoals, you get very hot, fine, and then you make an ingot, which is like a hunk of metal, right?
Right. A pigot. Yeah.
And
It's
and
an
then
ingot. Yeah. A
and
pig
then
iron.
and then and that presumably is also liquid then hardened. Is an ingot not liquid then hardened?
An ingot is like a rock. It's like
It's a rock. And
imagine this
so
is all metal, okay?
and so then you heat it again with some other super duper high
You put it in
temperature.
another furnace, and then it melts again, or you shape it, you bang it, you bang it, you bang it, you bang it, and it
So,
becomes a blade.
you know, this
Watch the
conver
videos.
this conversation is fascinating for a number of different reasons, not the least of which I'm reminded of Mishnah Shabbat 7:2, which is the 39 Melachot
Yeah,
that are the forbidden activities, and the actual last activity, which is 38 on the list, because the last one has to do with carrying, is makeba patish.
yeah.
You hit something, the blacksmith hits something with a hammer in order to see if the iron is tempered. And what it suggests, and that's the last act of civilization. And Abraham Goldberg's masterful interpretation of the 39 Melachot is being four essential processes of civilizing humanity.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. And
Feeding, clothing, writing a
it's
book.
baking, clothes making, writing for government, and tool making.
Nice.
And then the
Um,
carrying is cultural diffusion because then you move from other. But the point is, what it suggests is that the last act of civilization is takes place according to this in the blacksmith's furnace. So perhaps the metaphor here, the core barzel, is that it's a way of suggesting that the outcome of the Egyptian slavery experience, with all of its negativity, was actually the civilizing of the Israelites.
I like that. I'm going to
And that's quite
you
powerful, I think.
quote you in my Parsha sheet. Okay,
Thank you.
that'll be quotable.
I'm very
Don't
glad that
forget the royalties.
I'll get
I'm
the
very,
royalty.
I'm very glad that that this connoted for you Mishnah 7, Shabbat Mishnah 7 too. For me, it connotes Bruce Springsteen's song Youngstown. Uh, Here in Northeast Ohio, back in 1803, James and Danny Eaton found the ore lying in Yellow Creek. They built a blast furnace here along the shore, and they made the cannonballs to help the Union win the war
There
here in
you go.
Youngstown.
Okay,
Oh,
so as long as we're going literary, last line of Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, or second to last line. I go to encounter for the millionth time the reality of experience and to forge in the smithy of my soul
ooh,
the uncreated conscience of my race.
Woo, nice.
He knew how to write. And, so this metaphor of the smith and of the blacksmith is really, even today, quite potent because, Joyce was writing this a little over 100 years ago. Springsteen is a contemporary. And even though we ourselves are far from the blacksmith experience, the metaphor still speaks to us.
Yeah, the metaphor system, or even at the very least, taking raw material and making it into another material from which something can come out. And I think it's a lovely thought to say that if they are understanding metallurgy and metalwork as a great accomplishment in civilization, then Kura Barzel means that they are reaching a certain stage in their own development of human civilization, that there is a certain self-consciousness here about humanity, about not only the people of Israel, but the people of Israel in humanity, that we are in some ways being formed by this experience to share that experience with the rest of humanity. There are a lot of places to go with it. And the other thing I was going to say, even the word Holocaust, we tend to forget is a metaphor for something larger. Holocaust is the thing that is completely burned. It's a word that comes out of the translation of the Bible of the burnt offering. And in a way, it originally frames, although we tend to use the word without thinking about its meaning, original meaning. It was the original framing of this whole experience when the destruction of European Jewry, the death of 6 million Jews, did not happen all by fire. It certainly happened through other means. But we'll set that aside. I want to talk about metaphor because in the time remaining, let's think about metaphors, especially in chapter 40. We've talked, in past years on Nachamu and Isaiah, and I said things like, if we didn't have Isaiah, I don't think there'd be a Judaism, and I don't think that's an
Well, this is second Isaiah.
if we didn't have second Isaiah, I don't think there'd be a Jewish people because it does take someone of the spiritual, poetic, and prophetic, quality of Isaiah to help shape the experience of what Israel went through, the catastrophe of the destruction and the exile. And when he says in the beginning of chapter 40, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, comfort, oh comfort my people, Yomar Elohim, he's employing a certain metaphor. And the metaphor right at the beginning, Dabru Alev Yerushalayim, Vikiru Eleha, speak tenderly. Our JPS is translated speak tenderly to Jew. But you know what? Let's get a little more literal.
The best that you have to get a little more literal to really enjoy the metaphor because
Exactly.
if you just turn it into an idiom, you
It
lose the
You lose
metaphorical
it.
power.
Speak to the heart. I mean, can you imagine? This is an embrace of a lover to a beloved, and here we'll use the gendered masculine lover to the feminine beloved, who is compared to the widow, right? Who is comfortless, who is in agony, excruciating pain, and you're speaking to her heart. Okay, whether or not it's in the closeness of an embrace or in the gentleness of the way that someone could convey words of comfort. Kiru,
Right. We should clarify, Elliot, though, that that image of the widow and the uncomforted widow actually comes from Echo, which we read on Tisha B'Av,
okay,
Book
so
of
yeah,
Lamentations,
right,
and it's the backdrop for Isaiah's words here of
yeah.
comfort.
So,
If I might just
go
make
ahead.
one point. So in the verse back in Vaethanan, the whole point, it seems, of the Kor Barzel was to create a people that could belong to God.
Yeah,
And thinking about it while I was listening to the two of you, it occurs to me that perhaps what makes for a people is shared suffering, that there is some core experience of suffering that brings them together. And what Isaiah reminds us is that suffering in itself has no meaning, but meaning can come from the comfort and the comforter.
I for the reason that you initially resisted the Kur HaBarzel metaphor and the idea that this terrible suffering, it's going to be good for you. There's a kind of uh, what's the word, like distressing uh, abusive parent metaphor here going on because I made you be in slavery. I knew you were going to grow up. I toughened you up. That's like terrible. You don't want God that you don't want to imagine that the God's the mean parent who beats the child hoping to toughen them up. And it's a little hard to avoid it here. And I'm going to make it even worse for our listeners in a second. Listen, Nachamu Nachamu Ami, which really I think grammatically speaking or syntactically speaking should probably be Nachamu et Ami. Says the Lord to me, the prophet, comfort my people. They need to hear some strengthening words. They've been through terrible exile, and you got to strengthen them. And Dabru alev Yerushalayim, speak to her, Kiru eleha, speak to her heart, call to her. Ki mal'at tzava'a, ki nirtza avona. The term of service is over and the sin has been atoned for. Ki lakcha miyad Adonai kiflayim bikol chatotea, because God has punished her 2 times over for all of her badness, for all of her sins. Um, that's a little hard to bear. That God, there's enough injustice in the world to think that God decided to double up the punishment. It's really a little distressing. And now I'm just going to make it a teeny bit worse. I didn't go see how many times this phrase appears, but Dabru alev Yerushalayim, speak to her heart. In the Genesis 34, in the Shechem and Dinah episode, in which
Yeah.
Shechem rapes Dinah, either uh, it's not entirely clear that it's a physical assault. It may be a uh, socially inappropriate relationship or whatever. But when he regrets what he has done, certainly if it's a physical assault, or even if it's a social, like improper seduction or something, is Vaidaber aleva ne'ara. He speaks to the heart of the girl. So is the people of Israel here almost a rape victim from the terrible suffering of the exile?
So my
It's
teacher,
excruciating.
Rabbi Byron Shorian, pointed out interesting phenomenon in midrashic literature. So there's a law in Sefer Devarim, which we'll come up to in several weeks, that a woman who has been raped must marry the man who raped her and can never be divorced, which seems to us to be reprehensible. But Rabbi Shurin connected it with the midrash where God holds the suspended mountain over the Israelites, the Jews actually, because we're talking about the rabbis, and says either you will accept my Torah or rest here forever, because he would drop the mountain on them and kill them all. And in a sense, that also seems reprehensible, but it means that God and Israel can never be divorced. And this was important with the emergence of Christianity because part of the theological claim of Christianity is that they're the new Israel, the new wife of God. And the Midrash suggests that God can't have another wife because he's still married to the old one, which is the Israelites, the Jews.
Then how does that give us any comfort in terms of, the
Well,
consequences? I mean, obviously
as we
reading
were
the
supposed to learn at the seminary, Midrash is always supposed to give us comfort.
I suppose. Look, I mean, what's so interesting in the conversation, and of course we're running out of time. We're just getting started here. Is that the metaphors itself themselves, shape the way we understand these experiences. So whether it's the kura barzel, the cauldron, the crucible of iron, that we can interpret in many many different ways. And here we interpret it in many different ways. One which is raw material coming out as some other kind of material going through transformation, like exit, like the slavery was, or refinement, or the metaphor of abandonment, the widow or loss, widowhood, and the inconsolability of Jerusalem in that moment, and the tenderness of communication, notwithstanding the fact that underneath that tenderness, or just behind, it is a violence that is beyond the proportions of our description here, which is what Isaiah might be summoning here. I mean, again, I'm shaken by these thoughts, and I'm okay. So give me some comfort, man. Give me some comfort. Give me.
Okay, so here is where the comfort comes from, I think. You're both public rabbis. You've been exposed to some of the terrible things that have happened to human beings, some
Yes.
of them beyond the imagination. And yet, the response of the community has to be to provide comfort. No
Yeah.
matter what happens to a person, another member of the community has to show up and face and address that person. And it's often very difficult and it could seem like it's meaningless, but it's all we can do. And if we don't do it, then we have done nothing. And so the comfort comes from comforting people or attempting to comfort people, whatever the source of their pain.
Nice.
I'm going to, I think that's absolutely true. I say this many times, in pastoral settings. It's not that uh, it's not that Judaism tries to explain why difficult things happen. It tries to respond when difficult things happen, and that's as Barry said, I firmly agree. But to answer this question, I'm going to go a little bit more broadly theological. That there was a statement that was actually from a 19th century clergyman, but MLK used to cite it, Barack Obama used to cite it, lots of us cite it. The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. The world's hard and bad stuff happens, and there's lots of suffering along the long arc of history. But ultimately, it does bend toward a certain kind of goodness, and Isaiah really believes this. And the overall theme of this latter third of the book of Isaiah, which we call second, and then there's the first Isaiah lived in the seventh
Eighth,
century, 8th century BC or 7th century. Yeah, I guess
eighth before
8th century
the
BC, and
fall.
then beginning here now in chapter 40, it appears to be in the 6th century BC. So it's unlikely it's the same individual. It's the same perhaps prophetic school, and this from chapter 40 through chapter 66, and those latter chapters are probably a third author. Um, this is a character who has tremendous faith that despite how screwed up the world can be, ultimately the power relationships, the things that exploit people, like his first Isaiah, that the lion will lie down with the lamb. Um, Ultimately the world will turn to the way it ought to be, not the way it is. The religion can help us see both of those things, both the painful way the world is and the beautiful way the world ought to be and one day will be. And the verse that I love um, is chapter 40, verse 4. Kol gei naseh kol har v'giva. Let every valley be raised up. Let everything seemingly lowly and small will one day get raised up. And all the powerful things, the mountains, the hills, they will be cast down. And the twisted ground will turn out into a plain, and the twisted rocky ground will turn straight, and the all the rocky ridges will become an even plain.
So it's so interesting how both of you frame these words, in terms of just how comfort arises and how, the metaphor itself, the different metaphors in Isaiah kind of take one out of, their present and put one in a context that is much larger. And I'm thinking, as you're both talking, I'm having a lot of flashbacks and deja vus to our summers at Ramah, and I know that this is being broadcast to our friends up there, and that they're going to sit at Shabbat in their beautiful settings, and someone's going to read these words, someone's going to read Nachamu, and truth is, someone's going to read these words in on all of our shuls. Never mind, whether or not we're sitting in nature outside or have the backdrop of a beautiful synagogue setting, and they're being recited in community. And it occurs to me, of course, that you know where the comfort comes from is that you're all experiencing something together. This is not just the person to person that you spoke about, Barry, and not only the kind of exaltation and transcendence that you may be experiencing. I'm just kind of elaborating what you're saying, Jeremy. It's just me, like in all of our settings we have community, and the community's there to hear words and to try and be attentive to a voice of comfort that projects itself from centuries ago. I think that's still quite relevant. I mean, we can't have enough of this, especially in difficult times, especially now, we're all very we still have a lot of tremendous trauma and pain, and we have a lot of anguish. We have a lot of anguish about what Israel experienced, what we see in just the unfathomability of others' suffering, the human suffering, and the 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 difficulty in charting a way forward for all of us, and trying to make sense out of what we will become, or what we become, and that's a huge question that we're all asking in this time. And Nachamu kind of puts it into a context of, here you are, all of your communities, you're all asking the same questions, and you're all trying to be comforted by each other as in the presence of each other, which is, how we do it as Jews, I think. And that's probably a good place to conclude our conversation here. I want to thank our viewers, our listeners. You mean so much to us, and we're always thrilled by your comments, and honored by your attention, uh, uh, especially during these months, summer, when many people have. You get your Torah from many sources. You have many choices for your Torah podcast.
We're glad you chose United Airlines.
We're glad you chose our podcast, and we're glad you spent this 30 minutes with us. And we look forward to spending another Parsha Talk with you. We'll see you on the next edition. And meantime, have a beautiful week.
Shabbat
Shabbat Shalom.
shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.